for just a minute and let all colleagues join. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute. Again, for those of you joining us, welcome. Thank you. I'm going to wait just another minute for more participants to join us, but you're in the right place and we'll start in just a minute. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruth Watkins. I'm from Strada Education Network, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you this afternoon for a discussion about value beyond the degree, alumni perspectives. We are thrilled to have remarkable panelists with us and a presentation of Strada's research this afternoon. I will begin with a brief report of research and then get to hear from three remarkable leaders in the field. A little bit of context on our views at Strada. First, I think it's important to acknowledge our belief and our really deep belief in the value of asking alumni about their experiences in our institutions, that alumni can tell us a bit about their experiences, about the value they see in their education, and about the elements of their education that they believe conveyed particular value for them, about what they learned and what fulfillment they gained from their experiences. Certainly, we have a deep perspective that alumni outcomes matter. I think as a nation, we have turned our attention to what outcomes individuals achieve beyond the completion of a degree. Certainly, those are economic outcomes, but also fulfillment and opportunity outcomes. So today, we get to look at some particular data on skills and how those skills relate to outcomes, what alumni report, and the outcomes they achieve. So in terms of the plan for the next hour, we'll begin with a brief presentation of original research led by Nicole Torpey-Sabo from Strada Education Network. And then we have the privilege of hearing from three leaders in the field, Danita Young, who is Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of Illinois, Brandy Poppadin-Smith, who's a Director of the Work and Learn program at Arizona State University, and Mike Rao, who's the President of Virginia Commonwealth University. So Nicole, we'll turn to you. And as you're listening, please feel free to use the chat or Q&A functions to let us know your questions. We will specifically have some time toward the end to field questions and make sure that we address the topics of interest to you. If you have a particular individual that you would like to respond to a question, put that in your chat or the Q&A as well. So Nicole, we'll turn to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ruth. And thank you for framing that up so beautifully. As Ruth mentioned, this is part of our broader program of research to really understand from the perspectives of learners, what are the outcomes that they experienced from education and what are the factors that influence those outcomes, and particularly looking at outcomes beyond the completion of a degree and not only earnings, but also some of those broader impacts on their life. So this research comes from a survey of alumni who completed a bachelor's degree over the past 20 years. And we're going to start looking at some of the outcomes that we heard about from those alumni. So, and just in terms of the flow of this presentation, we're going to start with looking at the outcomes kind of at the top level, and then at how those outcomes differ. And then finally at what we learned from the data about how to improve those outcomes, since we're all here because we care about students and improving their experiences. So we really want to get to what we learned about the factors that can really improve those outcomes for students. So the first thing I wanted to just share, these are some of the top line metrics that we looked at for those outcomes beyond completion. So when we look at income, we wanted to understand that as well, kind of a minimum threshold of income. Are students earning at least a 20% income over the average high school graduate? And so we found that almost 70% of alumni said yes, they were earning at least that $50,000. And then a couple of other top line metrics we looked at is whether they felt their education was worth the cost. About 3/4 did, or about 2/3 did. And then whether they felt that their education helped them to achieve their goals. You see about 72% there. But what's going to be really interesting, I think, is to go beyond these averages and look at the differences among who does and doesn't say that they're experiencing these outcomes. One of our first questions here was, does it matter? How much does it matter when someone graduated? How long it's been since they graduated? What influence does that have? And what we found actually is that these perceptions are pretty stable over time. So you can see that earnings certainly go up. You know, people are more likely to meet that earnings threshold when they've been out of school for a little bit longer, but these other value perceptions are pretty stable. So we want to understand, if it's not time since degree, what are some of the other things that are maybe influencing these perceptions of value from alumni? And also, what are some of the broader, taking a step back to get even a little bit broader about some of those post-completion outcomes? So we created a few indices based on a broader set of questions. First around career impact, and then second around life impact. And career impact is actually distinct from the earnings. We found that alumni, they tend to think of it a little bit differently. So not just about how much money they're making, but we find different responses when people are asked about, their satisfaction with their job and how much their education has helped them to qualify for good jobs and to advance their career. So there's a whole set of questions there. And then another set of questions about the impact on things like quality of life and participation in their community, becoming the best person they can be, and becoming a good role model. And just again, these are actually pretty stable over time. So we have a number of different indices. We're going to focus on that life impact and career impact in this presentation, but we also see that these are pretty stable over time. So where we do actually find a lot of differences, may not be surprising to a lot of people in this audience, but we find the same sorts of equity gaps that are common in terms of access and completion of a degree are also what we see in these experiences of outcomes after completing a degree. So, for example, we see that first generation students, those are the light blue bars there, they are less likely to say that their education helped them achieve their goals, that it was worth the cost, and to be meeting that earnings threshold. About 10 percentage points less likely in all of those categories. When we look at this by gender, what really stands out is the income difference. So women and men have pretty similar perceptions about the value of their education, but they're not earning the same amount. And this is looking only at people who are employed full-time. So not even, considering full-time, part-time differences. We see about an 11 percentage point gap in the percentage of women who are hitting that earnings threshold versus men. And finally, we see differences by race and ethnicity. So here we see that Black alumni are less likely than their peers to experience any of these, to feel that their education helped them to achieve their goals, that it was worth the cost, and to be hitting that earnings threshold. So this is kind of unfortunately familiar, things that we see in a lot of places in higher education. What I really wanted to get to is actually what we're finding about what can improve some of these outcomes. So what are we finding makes it more likely for someone to be experiencing life benefits and career benefits and feel the value of their education? And so here we had the data from the survey about all sorts of experiences that students had, their field of study, and then also the skills that they developed while they were in their undergraduate education. And what I want to share with you today is it was actually those perceptions of skills that came out as the most powerful predictor of whether or not alumni felt that they had experienced a lot of these benefits. And so I'll share with you the different lists of skills. This came from a variety of sources, including skills in demand from Lightcast, and then also AAC&U learning outcomes and NACE competencies, kind of a combination. And there were really 3 buckets of skills that we found that kind of empirically clustered together. So there were general skills, such as verbal and written communication, critical thinking, ability to learn new things, and creativity. There were some interpersonal skills like teamwork and leadership. And then there were specialized skills. So data analysis, project management, the quantitative abilities, and digital literacy. And the interesting thing is, even though these kind of broke apart, clustered together when we looked at them in the data, it wasn't any one of these groups that tended to be more strongly associated with those outcomes. So it wasn't that, only specialized skills matter, or only general skills matter when it comes to earnings and these other, beyond completion outcomes. It was actually really the combination. So it was only when you get, high perceived skill development across all of these areas that we saw really strong links with these outcomes beyond completion. And so next, I want to just show you some of the effects that we found. And when we were looking at this, again, controlling for things like field of study and demographics and these other experiences. And so these skills really came out as the most powerful predictor. So looking at earnings, we found that alumni who said that they had developed these skills to the highest extent, rating them as a 5, were earning about $8,700 more in their first year out of college compared to those people who had rated their skill development as low. So that's, pretty big difference. And then even more so when we look a little bit further out, so across that 20-year spectrum, we see a little bit bigger boost in that predicted difference of the median income that people are earning. And so we looked at the median income, and then we also looked at the probability of being in the top 2 income quintiles. So not just the median, but what about the upper end of that distribution? And again, we found a really powerful relationship between saying that you strongly develop these skills and then being in these top 2 income quintiles, both for the first year income as well as whatever people are currently earning. The other thing is skills were not only associated with earnings, but they're associated with these other perceptions of value as well. So here you can see people who rated their skill development on the low end, only about 25% would feel that their education is worth the cost and that they achieve their goals. Versus at the high end, you're up above 3/4 who say their education was worth the cost and they achieve their goals. This is a really strong relationship, even again, controlling for all of these other factors. The relationship between these perceptions of skills and value is very, very strong. And then similarly with those indices of career impact and life impact, at the lower levels of perceived skill development, very unlikely to rate oneself, at the high end for career impact or life impact. But then for those who rated themselves very highly on those skill development, you see 3/4 were also in those upper quintiles for career benefits and for life benefits. So this is pretty interesting to us. The next thing we did want to dig into was, we know that it wasn't a certain group of skills that was important, but breaking it down skill by skill, we actually did find some skills that really, really stood out in terms of their association with these various benefits. So with earnings and with value perceptions. So among the general skills, it was the critical thinking and ability to learn new things that were most strongly associated with these outcomes. For interpersonal skills, it was leadership. And then among the specialized skills, it was the math, quantitative abilities that were strongly associated with these benefits. And they each had a little bit of differences. For example, math was the most strongly associated with that first year income. And then when it got to current income, it was both the math and the critical thinking that were most strongly associated with these outcomes. Then when we get to value perceptions, it's really all 4 of these skills that are strongly associated with the perception that education is worth the cost, it helped you achieve your goals, and then the career benefits and the life benefits. So this was really interesting. We then wanted to look at, okay, well, what tends to influence whether or not students say that they develop these skills? So in some instances, things like math, of course, are associated strongly with certain majors. With critical thinking, it tends to be more the practices in the classroom. So things like active learning and project-based learning, for example. And then leadership is the one that I have one more slide that I want to show you that I think is really interesting because it was really experiences outside of the classroom that we found were strongly associated with these leadership skills. So here, we asked people whether or not they had participated in various extracurricular activities. You can see that those who had participated, those light blue bars, then were much more likely to say that they developed their leadership skills either quite a bit or a great deal. So especially that campus leadership and volunteering, community engagement, sports clubs and social groups, and then those who had participated in paid internships. All of these made it much more likely for students to say that they had developed their leadership skills during their undergraduate education. So the very last thing I want to return to is those equity gaps that we kind of started with. And so we saw at the beginning how certain groups were less likely to experience the same kind of benefits from their degree. And so then we wanted to check, okay, overall, these perceptions of skill development are really strongly associated with the strong benefits after completion. But what if we break it down? Is the same thing true for women? Is the same thing true for first generation alumni, for Black alumni? The good news is the answer is yes for most all of these benefits. So when we look at these value perceptions and then the career benefits, the life benefits, we didn't put all the numbers on here because it's a lot of numbers on a page, but across the board, they were very strongly associated. High skill development was really strongly associated with improvement in all of these outcomes for all of these groups, which is great. However, for earnings, it's a little bit different. So for earnings, we see overall, there's the $8,700 boost in the first year, $10,000 boost overall. And then for female alumni and first generation alumni, we also see pretty strong benefits associated with the skill development. However, for Black alumni, we didn't see any earnings boost that was associated with perceptions of skill development. This was pretty striking, pretty startling. And so it kind of leads us back to the question of what more do we need to be doing for our Black students, both as universities and then perhaps, what are the other factors beyond a university that we need to address in our society to see if we can, what we need to do to be able to close these earnings gaps. So overall, just a few recommendations, and we'll talk more with the whole group about these, but we'd say the first step is to measure those outcomes beyond completion. It's important for us to know how our students are doing after they leave the university, so that then we can aim to improve those and close equity gaps. We can see that skill development is important as a key goal because we see that it drives better outcomes beyond completion. That involves identifying high value skills that may be general, maybe specialized, and maybe different for different geographies and for people with different majors. So really thinking about what in that particular context is going to bring the most value. And then ensuring access to the experiences, whether that's in the classroom or outside of the classroom, that are going to produce valuable skills. And finally, engaging employers or others in order to have a broader way to address some of these outcomes gaps. So that is where I will leave it, but excited to turn to the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Nicole. What an insightful report that gives us so much to discuss. And with these three incredible leaders, ideas they have about how we can take these data and think about the student experience and doing all we can to ensure the best possible outcomes for everyone we serve. Nicole, just before we go to this next segment, there were a couple of methodological questions that you might, while it's fresh in people's mind, pick up on. One of them is about whether the analysis controlled for major or program of study. And then the other, just a little bit of clarification about what students exactly, or graduates, alumni, were expressing here in terms of, I believe, what they learned, their own assessment of what they learned in their experience. So I'll let you comment on those two things.
Yes. And so, yes, we did control for field of study because we know that that is a very important predictor of earnings and other measures of satisfaction with education. So all the things you saw, the charts, they should be labeled. But yes, we controlled for field of study and still saw big differences with those perceptions of skill development. And then the exact question there was, to what extent did your education help you to develop your skill in, it'll be leadership or critical thinking or so on. So that was the exact question. They rated it on a 1 to 5 scale. And then we created an average, an index across all of the 11 skills, and then also assess them individually in the one model as well.
Thank you so much. So please do keep these great questions coming, and the Q&A is probably your best place to do that. And again, if you have a particular person that you'd like to answer, let us know that too in your question. So panelists, welcome. We're glad you're here, bringing the experience and knowledge that you have from your own work with students. These are really remarkable findings, at least in my view, and I think about the many ways across my career that I could have used this information. I'm wondering what's really surprises you about these results. What do you look at and say, wow, that was noteworthy to me? And maybe, Nicole, we should give you the first word, and then we'll go to all three panelists.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think I was, I was surprised at the lack of relationship between skill development and earnings for Black alumni. That was pretty startling and surprising, unfortunately. But I was also really interested by the relationship between skill development and the life benefits that people saw. So things like, being the best person they can be and being a good role model. It's always interesting to me because I think that's an area that we're all interested in. And we know that education is supposed to develop these things, but there's been a lot less research about what is associated with those kinds of metrics of satisfaction with education. So seeing the relationship between skills and those benefits was actually really interesting, I felt.
Great, thank you. Well, Danita, let's start with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was interesting because I don't think the results surprised me at all. Being a Black woman and experiencing some of the inequities definitely did not surprise me. But in student affairs, we have been saying for years, and the data has definitely spoken in regards of the importance of co-curricular engagement, and knowing that if we get our students involved, they can develop these skills that are specific to whatever career path they choose. And we know how imperative it is for the future of their job success, and getting our students to have these opportunities to improve their leadership skills, their interpersonal skills. It contributes to that increase in their self-confidence. And it does link to some of the academic knowledge that they do experience as well, obviously. And so that's the importance of our institutions creating these student learning outcomes and student development outcomes, so we can be more intentional to help our students be successful after they graduate.
It is a very nice shout out to the co-curricular experiences that our campuses provide, and it really matters. Let me turn to Mike on maybe a little bit more on the academic side.
Yeah, sure. So I wasn't surprised at all. Candidly, we've been hearing this for a long time, and it was perhaps more anecdotal and here and there, but it was becoming a lot of here's and there's and a lot of these anecdotes ultimately can become data, and that's kind of the way I've been feeling. So this is very confirming. We see that you have those 4 skills that are, associated with strong outcomes, like critical thinking, the ability to learn new things, leadership, and math. But I would say what I'm hearing from that is a focus on the ability to really have an impact as an employee or as a person, a positive impact, or to impact positive change. And none of those surprised me, because I anticipated, when we particularly sort of started to enter the pandemic and got into it, you heard more and more about this, right? Because people wanted to see change. And so I think that's there. The bottom line is, candidly, with all of this, college has got to involve access to engaging experiences that give a student of any age an opportunity to really understand why they're being taught what they're being taught. Why is this valuable? How does this work? People are just not going to do everything they were told. In case that's not evident to everybody, that is already happening, right? So, candidly, we've got to give students access to experiences that enable them to gain valuable skills. And these are some of the valuable skills. And higher education is going to have to be a lot more connected to employers. And frankly, connecting today isn't going to help you. You got to stay connected.
Very good. Thank you so much. Well, Brandy, we should let you have a word here.
I hate to say that I'd love to throw my ditto in here, but I can't agree more with what's been said. Simply just that it wasn't surprising to read much of this. At times and at pieces of it, discouraging or disheartening that maybe some of that progress and equity has not happened just yet, and we're not seeing it just yet. That I think we in higher education tend to very much hope for, and that our work is contributing to that, to see more equitable outcomes. But the ownership we have to take of the reality of where we are, and it just further emphasizes the need to do the work that we need to do. As highlighted by Danita and Michael, that access, the importance of the experiences our students are getting that are complementary to the curriculum and their academic journey. The collegiate, the higher education experience, whether that be 2 years, whether that be 4 years, it truly is a holistic experience, and the importance of it being a holistic experience is something that for us, we need to embrace and ensure that every learner has equitable access to these high quality experiences where they are learning skills, where they are having the opportunity to explore themselves and their interests, and whether that's a chance for them to affirm what they're interested in and the direction they're heading, or an opportunity for them to pivot and understand this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And this is my opportunity to change course a bit, or simply, find a new semi-related or adjacent opportunity maybe. And I would simply say from our perspective and Michael mentioned kind of the engagement with employers, and our engagement of alumni, deeply, working on opportunity to bring recent alumni back and connect them with current learners and current students. And so this wasn't surprising in the sense that we've heard a lot of these themes as we are bringing those alumni back. About where they were finding value in their experience and where they were able to immediately make connections, and other places that have been more challenging for them to see value or relevancy and how they were spending their time during their academic journey and what they're doing in that first 1 to 5 years post completion as well.
Very good. Well, now, since you all said you were not overly surprised by these results, now let's roll up our sleeves and challenge ourselves a little bit with, okay, then if we look at our institutions and we really study these findings, we have to say that we probably as institutions have fallen short in creating equitable opportunities and equitable pathways, because we're seeing these data and we're saying, what could we do differently in our institutions to make these skill-based opportunities, these ways of learning, more equitable and more accessible for everyone? And I think those are hard questions, because we know that students are managing multiple things in life, demands and jobs and work and earnings and family. And we also know that in big institutions, it's easy to get lost. and not to necessarily feel comfortable, connected, or as if you belong, and really can access those kind of powerful experiences. So let's spend a few minutes on what our institutions can do more intentionally and purposefully to create equitable pathways to opportunity through experiences like this. And to shake it up a little bit, let's just go in reverse order, if that's all right. Brandy, we'll turn to you.
Sure. Complicated question, but deeply important question we're asking ourselves now and for many years in the future. I would say, you know, one point that stands out for us and how we look at that equitable access is there are several experiences that are deeply privileged, and that students that have access to them, and we are privileging those experiences by putting more value to them. If you want a good quality educational experience, you should and need to do these 4 things. And the reality of the access to those 4 things is not going to be the same for today's learner. And so how do we level the playing field, if you will, about the value of all experiences? And I say work experiences and other experiential learning opportunities. Often, you know, as we talk about co and extracurricular activities really falling into that space of experiential learning. I think one of the biggest things we need to do is stop asking our students and our learners to do more or different, but acknowledge and embrace where and what they're already involved in, and how do we better support them in those spaces. I use a small example of student employment, something that we're doing a lot of work here at Arizona State University around. Student employment is a wildly important opportunity for students to be building skills and to be doing their own self and career development and exploration. But that takes intentionality, it takes reflection, it takes investment in our students and our learners. And so I think that, you know, instead of saying to a student, you should be doing XYZ internship experience that's more closely aligned with your major, and that student struggling to be able to find that time because they need to work. And that campus work experience is actually fitting into their schedule and into their life really well. Well, let's take a step back and actually redesign the campus work experience so that student is truly getting that opportunity to develop skills and actually be able to reflect and articulate those skills the same way they would have in that internship that we may have been saying to them they needed to take someplace else. So it's not saying that we have to stop promoting these other experiences by any means. It's simply being more intentional and more accepting of the experiences our students are already in, and how do we intentionally design support around those so that our students are getting the most that they possibly can from them.
Yeah. Stop asking students to do more. That's a pretty good line. Mike, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I would say that we do need to stop asking students to just do more. So it's one of the reasons why when we came up with something called VCU Real, which is applied learning experiences in the real environments, we said it can't be on top of everything that's already there. It has to be more fully integrated. And so we wanted every area to get a chance to find a way to integrate that. I would say, Ruth, honestly, that, you know, this may sound strange, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think we all have to be more empathetic as leaders. We have to stop thinking about what worked for us or what happened in the past or all of that, and really go deeper into our own hearts and say, what is it that I really believe is what people need? And that's why this conversation is so great, right? Because what we're talking about is listening to and absorbing what other people are saying they need and works for them. And so when I say things like the needs of students, and of course, in my case, patients come first, what I'm really saying is, are you paying attention as a member of the VCU team to what a student's going through or what a patient is going through? In this context, obviously, students matter a whole lot more. But I will tell you, it doesn't matter. You've got to be focused on, if you're any kind of quote unquote business or organization that serves people, are you really focused on them? But more importantly, how their needs are changing. So our vision for the class for the future is really less about process and what we know, and more about experiences that are going to lead to the kinds of outcomes that students really need and want. So again, I think what we're going to have to do, and what we are doing at VCU, is we are connecting more. We have a large number of professionally centered programs, starting with medicine and so on, but really connecting faculty more with employment environments and with employers. So what we've got to do too is we've got to be thinking about where students may need to be now, but be so adaptable and so flexible and malleable that you know that the needs of the future of work are going to be very different than they are now. And so how do you create that culture where people don't get anxious and stressed out about change, but get excited about it and love the opportunity? It might actually make teaching more fun for us, right? It might make faculty mentoring more fun for us. But we've got to do that. The other two things I just wanted to mention, since you asked from a faculty or curricular perspective, is I think we've got to think about something that we all love so much in four-year education. Well, I guess we do it in all forms of education, general education. What are those things that really matter there? And so again, these skills, these high value skills we've talked about, have got to find their way into general education. And we've got to be sure that they are there. And by the way, we are doing that. So we're actually involving things like racial and ethnic justice as a part of the general education experience at VCU. It goes back to Nicole's presentation of some of the gaps that you see, right? If we don't address those someplace, where will we address those? We definitely have to have digital literacy. And I know that didn't come up, but I think it is going to continue to come up as something that is really, really important. And I want to say, although it's totally taboo to say these kinds of things in higher education, we got to talk about them more. We don't have to shoot at each other when we don't like what we hear. We need to get together and think through, some sort of edgy kinds of things like entrepreneurship. Can you think of a graduate who ultimately gets out there and doesn't care about entrepreneurship? Sure, very few. Most of them need to be connected to entrepreneurship. So ultimately, problem solving, logical, scientific reasoning, creativity, innovation, aesthetic inquiry, all of these are things that are going to continue to matter more than they ever have, but they don't sound like the higher education of the past. And we've got to get used to that, and we've got to listen more and be more empathetic in all of our leadership. Otherwise, as Lyndon Johnson said, why are we doing this? If you're going to hold the presidency, like for an example, in my case, then what's the presidency for? What are you going to do with it? I'm going to do what I need to with it, and everybody may not be happy, but hopefully I can bring them along if I can find their hearts and their empathy, as Jane Goodall always said, and help other people be more successful, because that's really why we're supposed to be here.
I really like the call to action that you're issuing. We're all in chairs of privilege and leadership in one way or another. How do we want to use it? And what do the data suggest to us? Danita, what do you think?
I absolutely agree with my colleagues. It is about investing into people, and we have to start pouring into people and change that mindset holistically across our campuses, and making sure that we are extending that grace. You had brought up like listening and being more empathetic. We do have a term here that we use in terms of grace. It's giving regular amounts of compassion and empathy. And so when you're able to do that with not just students, but our faculty and our staff, you are listening, you are looking at, okay, how can I be more supportive so that you can be successful? And if you're looking from the co-curricular context, looking at what some people call high impact practices, or some people call them high impact educational experiences, how do we use those to really promote that student learning through all of our activities, whether they're curricular or co-curricular, and that we intentionally design them so that they are growing, so that they are learning, and so they are having meaningful relationships with their friends, their peers, the other faculty and the staff, but actively being involved in real world applications of what they're learning in the classroom. How are they interacting not only with each other, but what are they doing to realize awareness of themselves? So being involved in student organizations and a leadership experience, or the first year seminar experiences, writing intensive courses, our living and learning communities absolutely contribute to that. Opportunities for our students to engage in some of the undergraduate research and service and community-based learning. It is important that we engage with our community. It is about public engagement, whether you're a private institution, 2-year institution, 4-year public. It is about getting connected with the community so that you're able to provide these experiences for our students so that they can learn. And even, our capstone projects that we do have here. Again, we work with employers, we work with postdocs to really design these experiences and these projects that will give our students specific skills, that will build their character, that will expose them to diverse ideas. But again, it's about shifting the emphasis and focus. A lot of times we focus on our faculty, but we do have to become more student-centered. We have to, again, work with our employers to figure out what really the needs are, and how do we, intentionally build that skill set for the students.
Really well said. And what a good segue. And then I think there's some great questions in the Q&A too that we can pick up on. You gave some powerful examples there that speak to one of the questions about institutions that really do have new models of alignment of education to employment, and how we could begin to build that in our institutions. Before we go quite specifically to that, all through a thread through all of your comments is the institutions being different. We're a little more faculty centric than we might want to be. We're thinking about what do students need, what do employers need. The whole model in many ways is set up, this is provocative, right? On the credit hour. Instead of where are the skills, what are the skills? There are fields actually that have a little better sense of alignment to, are we providing students with specific skills and knowledge? Uniformly though, we still are a bit stuck in a 120 credit hour model with 6 hours of this and 10 hours of this and check, check, check. Are we getting it wrong? Some brave one of our panelists, Nicole too, jump on in with whatever thoughts you may have. Really is the most positive question of the day.
And I was just going to say, what's interesting about this is you're talking about the credit hour, but then also some of all these other experiences we've been talking about that get 0 credits, right? Both of which are probably really important for the skills development. So if we were to really aim at skills development, then it would probably rebalance how we see some of the importance of these co-curricular activities. If skill development is the goal and that's what we're measuring, then you can have a more holistic way of thinking about how to shape students and their experience.
And Mike did that nice shout out about really wanting to do the work that matters. What do you think about this question, Mike?
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of things that we're doing that we probably can't change overnight, right? But we need to really be talking about and thinking about. And I would say that a lot of these indications that we're getting are very clear signals that it can't be discussed for 100 years, right? I mean, literally, that's how long we often discuss many things that we consider as changes in higher education. And while higher education has historically been proud of being resilient, I'm not sure that that's really anything that we will want to run around with as a badge of honor, because people are changing. We had this wonderful, wonderful vision in this country of higher education and what it would do if it were accessible back in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, and we continue to talk about it. Then we got focused on degree completion, and of course, that's a great thing. I think the real thing we're going to have to focus on more going forward, though, is when students graduate or finish with whatever they're going to finish with, maybe it's a micro-credential of some sort or whatever, then how well do they do? Right. And to what extent? So Nicole, when you mentioned measurement, I think the measurements can't be a test that determines that someone has skills. It would be when they're in the work environment, did it work? Did it really help them to get to the next level and have the impact, the positive impact that they wanted to have, to make the difference that they needed? And sometimes that difference might be, did I do well enough in my job that I could actually make more money, right? And so, and have a better way of life and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't mean to be overly pragmatic, but listen to what people are telling us, right? Life is changing, the world is changing, people's needs are changing, and that's got to be reflected in what we say, but it's got to be reflected in what we do for them. And so, again, I think that, we've got to be empathetically driven leaders that are willing to use our positions, even as powerful professors, faculty members, to change the ways that we can interact with and what we do for and with students. And frankly, they can probably help us a whole lot if we engage them more in what we do. We probably can learn at least as much from them as we teach them.
Wow, well said. And I think Greg has asked a question about thinking you're making a pretty emphatic pitch for a beefed up college scorecard, and I think you might be right. Let me ask others on the panel to talk about what you think about our perpetual focus on the credit hour, and then these powerful experiences that we don't give credit for, and how we might need to think differently.
Well, I would definitely say that I don't know if we have gotten it wrong, but I certainly believe that our singular approach has become antiquated. We are still operating off of the Harvard model of the 1600s and the 13th century European model of obtaining this degree, right? This milestone that says we have achieved and mastered this body of knowledge. And, you had mentioned change, Michael. A lot of times people are saying, change is coming, but it's already here and it's already been done. Change has already occurred. And in higher education, we have been slow to make those changes. And we look at industries such as medicine or technology or business, and they have absolutely kept up to date with evolving and updating their skills and models, but we have not done that. And so I do think we have to start looking at, even our technology partners, they are looking at how they can give credit to individuals to obtain a bachelor's degree. Workforce development is so important. And we do have to start thinking about different approaches to obtain a degree or credential or certification, what have you, because we have, we're in the midst of these shifting trends and we're slow to keep pace. We have to recalibrate what I think our educational experiences look like, our employee experiences look like. And I can certainly tell you, we are doing that here at the University of Illinois. Many of our academic partners and academic advisors are looking at prerequisites and saying, okay, does this prerequisite is it really necessary and needed for this, this area? For, to get this degree, this credential. And then if you're having a prerequisite, how does the other courses, do they build off of that? Are they necessary? And so they are taking a pain. It takes a long time to review that. So it's going to take quite a while, but at least they are starting to think about and rethink and reframe what is necessary to say you've achieved mastering a body of knowledge. But again, it goes back to changing our mindset.
Very good. Randy, anything you want to add on this?
I again, so much agreement with my colleagues here, and I appreciate how beautifully they have shared their thoughts. I think an interesting connection between something that Michael said and something that Nicole said. I think, the recognition of the evolution higher education has gone through over the years, and we think about accessibility in particular, the accessibility of higher ed. And Ruth, to your question about what are we getting it wrong is the focus. And Nicole, the mentioning of certain experiences that we don't get credit for, and I would say that's the piece that right now we're not getting right, which is Danita, to your point of the structure we have created or the definition that we are working off of about what it means to obtain that body of knowledge, to get that credential, that stamp of yes, you have learned, you have mastered, right? That has not, our definition of that simply has not kept up with the dynamic nature of today's learners. We have opened and we are continuing to find ways to open accessibility to higher education, and there's much more work that needs to be done there. But at the same time, our definition of what it means to be able to earn that credential that we are carving out, that has to have changed too. And that's what hasn't happened fast enough. And so I think to all of these points and these experiences, stop privileging certain things about the collegiate experience and start embracing and valuing the really holistic part of the entirety of the experience and all the different components, and how different learners need to go through different experiences, but they can equally demonstrate and showcase an acquiring of knowledge and acquiring of experience that is valuable for enough that we should be saying yes to that. And I think we are simply, to Michael's point about empathy, we simply aren't saying yes enough to our students and valuing their experiences, their backgrounds, what they bring. And we're also not saying yes enough to us as leaders and staff and faculty about living in parameters and being able to push outside of those a little bit with the focus of putting the student at the center of what we're doing, and the need to, Danita, I think you mentioned it beautifully, pour into our students. We need to stop expecting students to fit this mold, and we need to allow that mold to be far more malleable, and our commitment to be pouring into them as learners in very dynamic ways.
Really powerful points here, panelists, and I can just now pick up a few questions from the chat and then let whoever wants to respond. We can just take turns on these things, or when you've got something good to say. There are a number of questions in the chat focused on employers. Lawrence has asked a question and said kind of what's been missing here in a lot of higher ed is awareness of what employers want, need, what employers are saying, where the workforce is going. So that's one, if you've got something to respond to there. And I would also pick out a question from Beth a while back in this saying, given the pace of change, many of our institutions need to think about a lifelong relationship with our students and alumni that allows them to reskill and return as needed. From any of the panelists, and including Nicole, are there things you want to comment on either of those? Ed to employment, workforce awareness, are we listening to what employers need? And anybody doing something really innovative on the long arc of our relationship with our alums?
I'll just comment on the employer side because I think that that's a beautiful point in the report that was pulled out, and I think something that we can't echo enough, which is the importance of the relationship between industry, all industries, and higher education as an industry too. It needs to be a two-way street. We need to have communication and mechanisms where we are consistently and regularly learning from corporate, nonprofit, government, what they need and what they want in new graduates that are coming to them for employment purposes. But we as higher education also have a role to play in this. And this is why I say two-way street, because as we look back to the conversation about equitable outcomes, and specifically when we, Nicole shared that point about specifically Black alumni, and we look at earnings incomes, we need to take a more definitive stance and role in challenging our employer partners about their hiring practices and their recruiting practices. How can we make sure that we are sharing what we know about our learners of today, what they need to know about them, and how the knowledge base we simply have about how they can be evolving and reforming their own practices so that their hiring, is more reflective, and those outcomes, they now become a partner with us in work towards creating more of those equitable outcomes, specifically, especially in that earning space too.
And if it's helpful, I'll dive in on the other comment or a good point about lifelong connection. I've always thought that, there are some students who graduate from college and they stay connected to the university for a very, very long time. One of the reasons, candidly, that we as presidents and increasingly vice presidents for student affairs and other areas are so involved with alumni now is because it brings tremendous benefit back to us. And so you can see this on so many dimensions. One is when alumni do really well, they are some of your best folks to connect with current students and inspire them. They can inspire them a whole lot more than we can because they can say, I was exactly where you are at the same institution. I even sat in the same seat, or I lived in the same residence or whatever, and look at where I am now, and let me tell you about how I got where I am. The other thing is, if we're going to talk more about experiences, and not everybody will be able to do the same experiences. I want to be clear about that. Greg made a good point in the chat about, does everybody have to have the same thing? No, they don't. But do they need to have something that gives them a context in which what they're learning makes more sense to them and has greater value? I would say yes, because I don't know very many people, and there are some, I said I don't know many, but there are some who are willing and prefer to sit in a classroom for 120 credit hours and listen to a one-way speech. Very few, and very few left, right? And so what I'm saying is, our alumni can be wonderful at creating internship opportunities because they know the institution. Our alumni are probably in the best position to influence our faculty too, because our faculty have great respect for our students and our graduates. And they'll say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We could change this and we could change that. And so I do think a lifelong connection is important. And frankly, we've started it because, frankly, we do a lot of fundraising. Just this last year, we raised, I think, $250 million from alumni and others. But that shouldn't be your only reason. There should be something that is connecting them with their hearts to the institution. And that's, of course, going to be the core of your mission, which is the student, right? And so I do think that idea is absolutely right on, and we need to pursue it. I think everyone needs to keep some kind of account, if you will, with their alma mater forever and ever. And then the alma mater has to do a better job of giving you a reason to stay connected.
Well said.
I agree. Ruth, you had asked about something innovative, and I know we're running out of time, but we have a focused scholars program that is set to, it stands for Fostering Opportunity, Community, and Unwavering Support for Underrepresented First Generation Students. And that program is a program out of our career services, and it's a partnership with our Office of Minority Student Affairs, as well as other corporate sponsors and employers, but it's a year-long intensive program that works towards eliminating that gap in this post-graduation outcomes. We're talking about starting salaries and their career trajectory and earnings potential. And, we sat down, and it came to us from alumni. And so that's the beauty of, we're talking about sitting down, interacting, having partnerships with employers, alumni, faculty, and staff to create this program so that we can create this economic security, if you will, for our students. And it has worked out beautifully. And I mean, we're hoping that we can expand it.
That sounds fabulous. As far as a concrete solution where you used alums and employers to help build, if you can, pop that into the chat. If there's a place we can go online and read and learn more about it, it really sounds extraordinary. I think, Nicole, is there anything that you would want to add? And otherwise, I'll wrap us up.
Yeah, I mean, I just think we've heard, and I'm sure everyone, that works in higher education has just witnessed the importance of people being connected to their purpose, and how much more they can identify that when they have, when we engage with employers and with the careers people might have in the future, and they can really see their learning working toward that goal and embedding the skills that they're developing. It just, is beneficial for not only after completion, but for student engagement and for, graduation, and then all the way up to success afterwards. So I think, it's not saying that everyone, education is just going to be technical and vocational, because we've seen the importance of the general skills, but just also how to embed, if you're thinking about critical thinking, how that's going to relate to what people are doing afterward, I think is so important.
Thank you very much. I have to say, there was a comment in the questions or chat a bit ago from Don, and Don said, wow, what business would make it with 35% of the purchasers saying that they're not sure it was worth the cost? I'm pretty sure we all want to do better than that. We want every student that comes to our institutions to get the skills they need to achieve the outcomes beyond completion of a degree, the things they came for when they put their trust in our institutions. Great thanks today to our panelists and our researcher. for highlighting some ways we can do better for more students. It's a goal we share. I think I'm leaving inspired with ideas about the future, and I hope you are too. Everyone will receive a copy of the slide deck and the report. So thank you so much, especially to our panelists for taking the time to join us, and for everyone for thinking about how together we can do better for more learners. Thanks so much. Be well.